This is the Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am located in Manaquesk in St. John, New Brunswick, which is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik-Maliseet people.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Matt Stranick, and I'm here providing a guest lecture of sorts for Education 5030, Teaching, Learning, and Curriculum with the Thompson Rivers School of Education, Dr. Pamela Gurney's class. And I really wanted to say, first of all, thanks a lot to Pam for inviting me to provide. This is actually the third in a series of lectures across a few of her courses. And on this particular class, this particular topic, we're going to be talking about some various IT and technology systems and how these can be used purposefully within an educational enterprise, as it were. So I thought in terms of trying to demonstrate that it might be more beneficial to actually have several different videos, 5 actually, sort of spliced together into one supercut is how I'm envisioning this, as sort of a film director in my own mind, I suppose. But I think it'll sort of make sense as we go forward. But I thought really having sort of an intro kind of segment like this, and then basically sort of 3 kind of categories or broader areas to hit on, each of them with their own shorter video, as well as sort of a midpoint and end point, consolidating, if you will. So it's sort of a 5-act play, if you will. I've included below this recording the supercut, as it were. I've placed the 3 sort of content areas of the discussion as such. And I guess just to speak to that, where I see this going is really, as I was kind of thinking how to best bring this lecture forward in a way that's meaningful and also hopefully useful, I really thought it would be wise to kind of focus on almost a tool-oriented approach, in as much as there's several baskets, if you will, of IT applications, learning technology applications, which we might consider helpful. So we'll get into that, but I wanted to, I guess, even more at this very early juncture in the discussion, just give you a bit of an overview of myself, what I'm about. So as mentioned, and as it says here on the screen, Dr. Matt Stranick. I'm originally from Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is this background where I am right now. And for me, as an educator, place is kind of inseparable from my practice and my journey. So some educators, people who are my peers, people who are relatively ahead of me or at my same point within their careers, a lot of them have managed to sort of stay in one city, one organization, one role, even for many, many years. I would also say that due to the realities of the current marketplace and job market, that is becoming somewhat of a rarity. I think, generally speaking, that anybody within the field of education or entering the field as a professional teacher or what have you really would do well to be mindful of the fact that you may have to travel for your work. You may end up finding that the suitable role for you is somewhere other than where you currently live. And whether that's elsewhere in Canada, whether that's internationally, again, I do think everybody who's in an education program has some notion of what they want their career to look like. I would say that for me, I didn't intend to necessarily travel as such, but for instance, I began my first experience as an educator in Seoul, South Korea. I had the opportunity to teach at a private language institute, a Hagwon, as they're called, and that was really the entry point for me back in 2006 for getting into the field of education whatsoever. So it was sort of on the basis of a year to 16 months of working in Korea, teaching English, primarily to younger kids, but also to middle and high school students. I had the opportunity to do the one-year Bachelor of Education program at one of my local institutions in Fredericton at St. Thomas University. And through that training, I became qualified to teach social studies and English at the middle and high school levels, the secondary level here in New Brunswick. As it turns out, the job that I ultimately accepted upon graduating from the BEd program was not working with high school or middle school students, but rather in Doha, Qatar, at a Canadian campus of an institute. Now it's actually owned and run by the Qataris. Well, it was always owned by the Qataris, but now it's run, and they've rebranded it as a different kind of institution, a university compared to a technical college when I was there. But that was somewhere that I spent 6.5 years. Both my kids were born there, so that was not necessarily something I would have been expecting when I first landed in the education career. So that was sort of one surprise that I encountered for 6.5 years, taking on a few different roles within the communications department, including just sort of regular classroom teacher, but then also lead instructor for the department, and also writing center tutor, all of which led me to kind of take the opportunity to complete a master's degree through another local institution, Master of Ed through University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, largely through distance, I have to say. And then even beyond that, into a doctoral program, the Doctor of Education at University of Calgary. So I kind of had these opportunities for further professional growth and development due in a large part to the circumstances and surroundings in Doha, in Qatar, where, as mentioned, I spent about 6.5 years. At a certain point, I sort of decided, we decided as a family, that it would be better for my kids to spend some more of their early years in Canada as opposed to overseas. So from there, I went to what is now called Ontario Tech University in Oshawa, Ontario, within the Greater Toronto area, working in faculty development, which is to say supporting university staff with teaching strategies, teaching support, learning technology, curriculum development. It was pretty a pretty broad basket, if I can put it that way. And after 3 years in that role, I ended up at Thompson Rivers University, working in what was then considered to be a tenure track faculty role within the Open Learning Division as a educational technologies coordinator. Now, the tenure track process did not go in my favor in as much as I applied to renew my tenure track appointment, and that renewal was unsuccessful. That's something that probably I'll speak to a little bit more at the midpoint in the lecture, but I just really have to sort of speak to that. I have to address it, especially given the fact that this is a lecture about learning technology. So since my time at Thompson Rivers ended back in 2022 in February, I've done some consulting, some independent work on my own on my business venture, my consulting venture, and for the past 8 months or so, I've been working back in New Brunswick for a security company, and I've been basically assisting with their e-learning developments and sort of helping transfer knowledge and teaching from paper-bound volumes and binders and the like to digital contemporary learning experiences and learning objects. So it's been a pretty broad career just in terms of the types of roles and also in terms of geographic distribution of the roles, as it were. And again, I'm just really deeply grateful to Dr. Gurney for inviting me to speak about some of these points with regards to especially learning technology. Will be sort of the view that I have of this, the way that I sort of have this outlined, is that we'll spend a bit of time speaking about the learning management software suite of tools. So this would be, for instance, applications such as Moodle, Desire to Learn, Brightspace, Blackboard. There's a few of them out there. Thompson Rivers uses primarily Moodle. So we'll just be speaking a bit about the pros and cons, the affordances and constraints, and some of what the options might be in terms of obtaining a working, practical knowledge of learning management software. Then we'll also take a bit of time and look into another aspect of the online or learning technology endeavor, and that would be, in this case, I would see it as the CMS, so content management system on the public / open web, as it were, and I guess notably the WordPress application suite of tools. I always kind of struggle a bit. Content management system, web building software, website building software is the best way really to look at it, I suppose. Because again, I think that's kind of a bit different from the tools and capabilities and applications that are bundled within the learning management software. And then finally, I thought a bit of a discussion about productivity suites of online tools, in terms of something like Microsoft Office 365, Google applications such as Google Docs, Google Drive, Sheets, Slides, and whatnot. So honestly, that's kind of where I want to go. We're going to be taking sort of a midpoint to reflect after the discussion on CMS, and then probably just a bit of a summary or conclusion as well. So if you can imagine a 5-act structure, if you will, to this, I'll wrap up now this introductory part. Hopefully this gives you a sense of what I'm about, what I'm bringing to this discussion, and hopefully gives you some idea about what we're going to be talking about as well. So thank you for your attention thus far, and the next segment will be commencing presently.
Hello, everyone. Again, as the case may be, for those who are watching what I'm referring to as the supercut, the full video coming in at roughly an hour, give or take, maybe slightly more with the intro and closing credits and elements. The way I sort of envision this, as I mentioned in the general introduction, is that each of 3 different, I guess, toolkits, as a way of describing it, would be kind of a good way to organize this discussion. So we're going to start out in this particular segment speaking to learning management systems, the LMS, as the acronym goes. And then shortly after roughly 10 minutes or so, we're going to switch into another segment, if you will, speaking to content management systems, somewhat different, not entirely different, but somewhat different from LMS. We're going to call that one CMS. And finally, the last sort of I guess, bundle of tools, the last toolkit of sorts that we'll be looking at prior to the end of the video is what we're going to call productivity software, productivity suites of apps, such as Google and Microsoft Office 365. So this is the kind of thing where I've actually done a number of these kinds of videos and sessions with Dr. Gurney before, and just as will sometimes happen, the recordings are no longer accessible online. It's been a couple years, more than a couple years, since I was last on the faculty with the university, but I just assume that as part of regular routine and maintenance, that those are no longer available. If I remember what those videos tended to involve at the time, they were more sort of into screencasting. And that's cool. I definitely recognize, but for these topics, given that I'm not making use of the university's infrastructure or applications or other resources to deliver this, I felt like perhaps a more conversational style would be wanted here. That's also a bit in keeping with the podcast format, which Dr. Doug Reed and I have kind of come up with together over the past couple of years. And I just feel like this is a really good opportunity to have an open dialogue, an open discussion, if you will. So to speak to the learning management system, the most obvious example that I can think of is a system called Moodle. This is presumably the system wherein you're accessing a lot of the content for this particular course, Education 5030, as well as likely your other classes, the majority of them, if not all of them, through Thompson Rivers. So that's why I have not an actual picture of Thompson Rivers behind me, but an AI generated picture. So this is what Mage AI app thinks that Thompson Rivers looks like, which isn't too far off the mark, but I digress. Bit of a risk sometimes with the conversational style. To speak specifically to Moodle, when I talk about Moodle, I think what I want to do here, or any learning management system, I think I want to speak to a few key questions here. So we're just going to try and speak to what is it, why do we use it, where do we find it, and a little bit of how to use it. So to begin with, when we're talking about learning management systems, I mean, for me, I think of them as being fundamentally behind an institutional firewall. So when I think about online teaching, capabilities for teaching online, affordances, benefits, things that you can do, there's a fair amount of similarity between the function and capability of a learning management system like Moodle or Brightspace or Blackboard, and there are many others. Those are just three kind of the more well-known ones. So in terms of like what you're having the application do, it's not terribly different in a learning management system than the kinds of content, if you will, and the way of presenting content that might appear with a CMS, content management system, which is to say something that exists on the open web, so-called, the freely accessible internet, as opposed to a learning environment that exists behind an institutional password and authentication process. So that's kind of a major distinguishing feature for me. I guess I would go further and say what distinguishes LMS from, say, other types of learning environments, learning systems, is that among the bundled in tools, there's a lot of emphasis, a lot of use placed on not just presentation of various kinds of content. So whether that's PDFs for reading, links to external websites, various files, PowerPoint slides, videos, and the like, all of these things can be hosted and shared, again, very easily on a publicly facing website, such as through WordPress. But what's the LMS, Moodle, and or Blackboard, and or quite a number of these others, one of the primary features is the grading and assessment, the evaluation. So for instance, the grade book, which is populated by tests, quizzes, and other types of assessment and evaluation activities within the environment. The automated grading feature is, it's been my experience, both as a person who's delivered training and education of sorts through various learning management packages over the years. I've had that experience as being a teacher with several of these systems, but then also I've had the experience of being the person who helps the teacher. So when I worked at Thompson Rivers, one of my primary functions was to provide support for Moodle for faculty and staff who needed to use it for teaching or for other purposes. So I can safely say, based on those experiences, that the gradebook is a factor which really drives a lot of the use, particularly in larger classes, wherein it's just, there may be limits on teaching support. It may be 50, 75, 100 plus students in a class, So one of the great things about these learning management systems, the LMS, is that the grading function, whether it's a quiz or a test of some variety, it allows for an efficiency of scale. It allows you to deliver those kinds of evaluations and assessment for very large numbers of students, and at the same time provides a significant amount of automated grading through certain types of tests or quizzes. Now, again, I'm most familiar with the Moodle environment for this, but all of these systems are meant to have the same features. Far be it from me in this introductory kind of lecture, this introductory kind of discussion, to give you a breakdown, a column by column by column comparison of these systems, although that would certainly be a worthy endeavor. And come to think of it, if anybody feels like taking that on, I'd be interested if you were to share that with me. So in addition to efficiency of scale with regards to evaluation and assessment, a lot of proponents of these kind of systems find great value in analytics. So when I say analytics, what I'm referring to is, again, this is by no means an official definition. This is just me sort of providing a working definition. My understanding of learning analytics are that these are effectively the traces, the indicators that are left as a result of usage by individual students within a learning environment. So every time you log, or a student, a user logs into a learning environment, there's a record kept of that. How long, what time they logged in, how long they logged in, and if you felt like it, you could go, at least with Moodle, I can't speak in this case to other of the systems particularly, but I'm assuming that they have similar features. You have the ability to tell actually an entire pathway of use through an individual's, whether it's an individual session. So for instance, a student looked at a PDF or downloaded a file, then they maybe watched a certain amount of a video, all of it, what they looked at, how long they looked at it for, and potentially the kind of use that was made of it is available through very detailed logs of activity, which can be then aggregated into reports of usage across multiple sessions, an entire semester, individual courses. It's pretty helpful from a learning standpoint, proponents would argue, because effectively in an online or fully or even a blended class, depending on how it's arranged, attendance is effectively measured by checking into the course environment, and whether it's leaving something in a discussion board for a comment, or even just reviewing or accessing other resources, there's always going to be some trace of that. So again, that's a pretty strong feature for a lot of educators who sort of can look at the attendance, so to speak, last login dates, patterns of use by users, to determine, oh, perhaps this person is struggling, perhaps they need to be some sort of intervention or the like. So I tend to think of these as being a helpful feature, even though ultimately I think as a student, you just kind of accept that when you go into these systems and use them, that anything you do can and will potentially be tracked. And again, that's just something that people, I think, need to be aware of, both from the teaching side and from the student side. So those are just a few kind of aspects of these sorts of systems. Super convenient for those who teach the same courses over multiple semesters or multiple years. You have the ability to clone or copy an entire course shell So by course shell, basically what I mean is a specific course website within the larger learning management system for the institution. So the course shell that you use, for instance, for a fall version of Education 5000, let's suppose it's being offered the following semester for whatever reason. All that the teacher would have to do is make a copy of that particular course shell, and that'll be generated, all the evaluation, all the assessment, all the content, but not the student generated content. I mean, you could, but that would have to be specifically brought in. So convenience, in as much as once you have your learning environment set up in such a way that you are comfortable with, you know what your resources are, you know what you need to do, minus a few typical uh, changes in a semester or academic year, and then as well being able to share your entire body of course material with, say, another instructor, or perhaps you may be on the receiving end, being able to import either entirely or partially a fellow colleague's assessment, evaluation, and other content from within their shell. So automated assessment, convenience of use, the idea here that you can have engagement with students through learning analytics. These are all pretty good reasons why learning management systems are as popular as they are. Again, I think that this is a situation where the need for privacy, in as much as only registered students can generally access a learning management software package, getting into an institutional firewall, and being subject to the code of conduct across the university for online engagement. I think that that just gives people a lot of comfort, as opposed to teaching and learning measures on the open web. So I did say I was trying to only spend about 10 minutes or so on this topic, and I have now well exceeded 16 minutes. So we'll just pull this one aside for now, and there'll be some notes for sure, a paragraph or two speaking a little bit more to this. So for those who may just be experiencing this for the first time, I would say that in my real final point here on this topic is that it's good for you to know how to use one of these systems, even if you don't necessarily have any reason to use it right at the moment. So what I mean is, all of these systems, just about, I think probably all of them, have free trials available or free, very, very limited licenses. Moodle Cloud is sort of a de facto, publicly accessible, free hosted provider of Moodle courses. So my recommendation for people, regardless even of which of these systems they're using, is to obtain access to a limited license or free license, if you can get it, for one of these systems, and just set up what I call sort of a sandbox course. That is to say, a class, a hypothetical class, where you can set things up and just get familiar with the features, the functionality of the system in general, and then you kind of have your materials nearby. You have your materials close at hand within those courses, such that you can export them easily or readily into your live class, if and when such is assigned. Also, I've been using Moodle as an example quite a lot. For those who are in K-12 careers, who are planning on teaching specifically to K-12, I would also include the Google Classroom as a learning management software in and among the other Google apps for education, which we'll be speaking to a little bit later. Thank you for paying attention to this so far, and we'll see you presently for the next segment, which is to do with the CMS, Content Management System. Hello again. Again, for those who are watching the supercut, the fully strung together version of these several videos might be a little disconcerting. The background here is an AI, a MAGE AI generation of St. John Harbor, New Brunswick, which for all the photorealistic elements that are included here, I can most assuredly assure you that this is really not like St. John, except in the imagination of AI, which, not to say that AI is capable of imagining anything, but there you go. And the reason for this is because in this segment, if you will, we're speaking to Content Management System, CMS. So, as in the previous segment, or in a segment with a video adjacent to this one, depending on how you're accessing the format, we were discussing learning management systems. So, LMS, content management system, CMS. Essentially, that is another term for a publicly facing website. Content that is managed and placed, generally speaking, available for usage by people on the so-called open web, the World Wide Web, the internet. The idea with that is essentially, well, I mean, what I would say is that there's a fundamental difference in philosophy between education that is placed on a publicly facing site and educational resources and materials and processes that are placed within a learning management system. And it goes beyond, for me anyway, just the notion of having more privacy in a learning management system. It's effectively two different philosophies of education, as I've come to think of it, as I've spent a good amount of time in the learning technology and curricular kind of areas over the past 10 or 12 years anyway, within my career. And just to kind of speak to that philosophical difference, I would suggest that publicly facing sites, such as the example I'll use is WordPress. And the reason I'm using WordPress as an example is because I didn't really have any familiarity with WordPress at all until I began my employment at Thomson Rivers. That was a skill that I sort of picked up by helping other faculty university do various kinds of projects using WordPress. And also, I guess since my employment ended, I've actually made more use of it personally than what I had been even within my role. So hence the St. John AI Harbor imagery here. That is to say, for where, as it happens, then while in Kamloops, essentially. And this kind of goes to what I was talking about a little bit in the previous video, where relying on an institution's infrastructure or technology services may not necessarily be the most viable way forward over the course of a career. And my feeling on this is that if you have your own website, your own personal website, preferably with your own URL, your own custom domain, as it were, that is something that has a certain professional value, a certain professional cachet, if you will. One of the most, I guess, I don't want to say the most common, but an application that's sort of an approach, an application, more like an approach that I saw used in higher ed, which is to say at Thompson Rivers, as well as in some other spots, is for an e-portfolio. And those can be as simple as setting up a website and just attaching some of your favorite achievements to it, whether it's pictures or certificates from professional development opportunities or whatever. Or it can actually be somewhat more nuanced, somewhat more layered. And I guess just to kind of give you an example of the fact that a website, your own personal website, I'm recommending WordPress. When I was doing sessions fairly often at TRU on WordPress, one of the numbers, one of the stats. It's not a stat, but I mean just one of the measures, I suppose, of the popularity of WordPress is to the effect that roughly 35 to 40% of all the websites on the internet are built using WordPress architecture. So I think it just behooves people, anybody who's going to be in an educational role in these, we're in the middle 2020s now. I think you'd be doing yourself an immense service to gain some basic proficiency with how to populate content on a website. And again, one of the reasons I'm going to advocate pretty strongly for WordPress here is simply because it's extremely easy to use. The steps for it haven't really changed much, as I understand, in roughly 20 years or so that this has been a popular platform for blogging and then increasingly for other kinds of websites. So I think in terms of documenting artifacts from your career, in terms of sort of showing things that are important to you, it could be a good place for a teaching statement. It could be a good place for some video resources of classroom teaching experiences if you have those available. And really, the only limit to what you can put out there is on your imagination. The fact that we are having this dialogue, having this discussion, as it were, about these technologies, about these platforms, is through a WordPress-based website. And the format that Dr. Doug Reed and I have developed for podcasting purposes is based fundamentally on the WordPress. So in our process, Doug will share with me his topic for a given episode. He'll share with me his resources, like his readings, his journal, peer-reviewed journal articles and citations, and just commentary and images. And he puts those all into a Google Doc. And then I take the Google Doc link and open it up, and then take the content that he has shared in that document. And there's a little bit more to it than copying and pasting, but not that much more. Placing it within the WordPress post. So there are pages and posts in WordPress. Pages are sort of these static elements that just persist and don't go anywhere. Posts are for more frequent content, evergreen content that comes out with some regularity and refreshes on the top of the page. So for sure, when we do the podcast and for these virtual lectures, each time we do one of them, I create a new post on a WordPress site, very much like a blog post, but there are plugins. There are these very specific software elements that you can download from a very, very well developed directory, library, wherein you can bring those into your course and give it, or your uh, class website or your portfolio, and give the WordPress post that you're using for that, or the WordPress page, some kind of specialized functionality so you can really customize the look and user experience of what it is you're trying to share. So on a previous lecture on the Education 50/40 Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion lecture that we did for Dr. Gurney, we had this other post associated with it, and we then placed an audio file of the recording of our conversation into a video editor capability. And once the video and audio were just so within the Camtasia editing application, then the file, the MP3 file containing the audio gets uploaded to the WordPress website in the media library. The media library contains all of your images, anything that's a dynamic element, whether for sound or for pictures, or that it includes most of what you would put in your blog posts besides the text or besides certain interactive media. But we'll speak to that a bit later. So the plugin feature, effectively, one of the plugins, the Blueberry plugin, is pretty well regarded. It's had in excess of 100,000 downloads and installs, because when you select a plugin for a certain purpose, you can find out how many other people have downloaded it, how often it's been updated, which is important. And that Blueberry, it's got a unique spelling, as software applications sometimes do. Takes the audio file and then an image from the WordPress post, and it's through that the podcast then makes its way as a sound element and something you can listen to and experience on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and all of the others. So it really makes life a lot easier than, say, for instance, me going to every one of those podcast platforms and then trying to upload content into them or whatever. So it makes things a lot quicker, a lot more efficient in that regard. So those are a couple of use cases. For instance, the e-portfolio, again, something you can do with a bit of work, but not too much, that can really make you look professional while you're looking for a job, or while you're documenting artifacts and experiences from your career for sharing, and as well for a podcast. That's another kind of use case, which may not necessarily, you may not be thinking of starting a podcast, but you may at some point want to place video or audio on your website. And again, WordPress makes it very easy to do. So I would, again, although you have access to WordPress through Thomson Rivers and through the province of BC, it perhaps makes more sense to obtain a license for WordPress through a hosting service. I use Reclaim Hosting because I simply don't want to own my own server and have WordPress installed in my own location. that to me is more work than I am prepared to put into it myself. So I pay a very modest annual fee for a professional license for WordPress. Professional as in it gives you more space and storage, essentially. I don't. This is because there's now something like 53 to 55 podcast episodes, and it takes up a lot of space. But again, for something that I've described, just in terms of a professional or class-based website, if you wanted to have a place on the open web for your students to go and try some things out in public on the web, then again, I just think that WordPress is really a good way to go. It's a modest financial investment to have your own site, your own domain, and you always have the ability to export all of your content if you decide to leave your hosting service. So again, one of the better or cooler features of a CMS, a robust CMS, WordPress in this case, is that you can choose to export your site in the form of a file. And then if you wanted to, say, move to a different hosting provider or have your own server, do self-hosting, which some people do, you would be able to take that WordPress file that you've exported from your previous hosting service and then just reconstitute that in a new installation of WordPress hosted by somebody else or by you. So that's just kind of, again, a run through. I mean, I'm assuming that people who have made it into an education program in these early to middle years of the 2020s, I trust that you have some sense of what a blog is, what a class-based website might look like. Hopefully these use cases and hopefully my description of some of these sort of essential features of a CMS are apparent to you. And again, I would just really say that there's a lot of value to be had for your students in having them do personally meaningful projects, individually or in group, using a WordPress site in public for those kinds of interactions. Because as you may guess, when you're in the career, when you're a full-time teacher or a full-time educator of any kind, everything you're doing is going to be publicly scrutinized. So I think just sort of getting accustomed to the notion of working publicly, working transparently in the open web, as it were, is probably it's probably helpful. The learning curve for how to use WordPress is not significant. I'm happy, literally, to work with anybody in that regard. If you were to contact me directly, if you wanted to know more about setting up a WordPress site or what some of the ins and outs are, more than I've gone into here, because this has been just the most bare kind of overview, I would be very grateful to have that conversation with you. Again, I've included some resources in the paragraphs below, in addition to this commentary. So I think probably I will leave it at that for now. So we have one more set of tools to go. That is going to be the productivity suites, and that'll sort of take us to the end of the content area of this discussion. So see you in a few, or momentarily if you're listening to the supercut.
Hey everyone, it's Matt again. I know we've just been through a couple of different sequences now, what I'm going to refer to as the LMS sequence and discussion, and the CMS, which is to say, for my purposes, for our purposes, WordPress. And I feel like after that discussion to do with WordPress, content management, and the learning management system, I felt like it would be kind of a timely moment to sort of take, it's not quite, it's a little bit more than midway through the recording at this point. In the introductory segment, I had Fredericton, New Brunswick in the background. Some of you will likely notice the scenery of Kamloops behind me in the virtual background. And I guess that's just kind of in keeping with the fact that, as I kind of referred to in the introduction, I've had a lot of different kinds of work experience, a lot of different kinds of educational experience over what's been an 18-year career at this point. And my involvement with learning technology was really, I guess, at its highest level when I was working on a full-time basis for Thompson Rivers, for TRU. And I guess I think it's important to kind of pull back from the context a bit to kind of give you an overall picture of my situation. So, as I mentioned in the intro, I made an attempt to remain on the tenure track with TRU. It didn't happen, and that was really kind of a formative moment in lots of different ways, because when I learned that I wouldn't be continuing there, I put a lot of stock in the fact that I was going to probably remain at TRU. I put a lot of stock in the fact that I was probably going to remain in Kamloops. And so I guess this kind of speaks to a wider point of how, like from my work basis, I was using largely, almost entirely, institutionally, which is to say supported by TRU, tools such as the learning management system, Moodle, and also the content management system, WordPress. Now, there's been a lot of development that I kind of worked on in those areas, in those kind of two sets of tools, if you will, which when my role ended, I didn't really think to relocate it or transport any of it outside of the institution, where now, 2 years plus later, after my employment there ended, I probably, if I had the opportunity to, would have access to some projects and some of the websites and other kinds of online learning applications that I help develop and help participate in as far as projects and whatnot, but I simply no longer have access. Similarly, any email or any personal data that was accumulated in the productivity software, specifically Outlook, that's gone. That's no longer available. And it's actually now at the point where, just kind of due to, I don't know if it's miscommunication. I don't know if anything was miscommunicated or not, but just recently, in fact, I no longer have any kind of access to even like the basic Thompson Rivers website, tru.ca. If I put that in as a URL, I just get a blank screen saying that the website is not available. My IP address specific to my computers, my devices, has effectively been blocked. So I'm not necessarily going to go into the whys and wherefores of all of that, except that I feel fully comfortable with anything that I've been involved in or done. It's really more to the point that you don't know what a career is going to have in store for you. So, for instance, when I left the BEd program, I initially had a thought that I was going to be teaching high school to students in southern rural New Brunswick somewhere. And in fact, I ended up in the Middle East, and then Ontario, and then BC, and now back in New Brunswick, none of which I would have really anticipated. So, as far as my reliance on infrastructure, tools, capabilities, applications, I think it really behooves anybody in an educational role to not just rely on what your institution can provide. And so developing skills, for instance, with a learning management software package through, for instance, a free trial of Moodle with Moodle Cloud, just to become proficient with it from the administrator side. Or for those of you who are going to be spending a lot of time in K to 12, becoming proficient with G Suite for education as much as possible. Or even, I guess, just for the purposes of being conversant with the productivity apps. And I guess really, I would say it might be worth it for your own professional development to make some timely investments in some cloud-based software. So for instance, this recording is actually being done through an application called StreamYard, which is pretty ideal for a low weight podcasting app in terms of presenting visual or in terms of presenting audio. That's just something where I knew that I was going to have a need for a certain kind of service or product, and through a lot of searching and trial and error, this is the one that's proven to be relatively robust for my purposes. We also, on the podcast, make use of Skype recordings quite a lot. So I think it's a matter of knowing what you may need to know, being able to anticipate what you may need to know in terms of skills. So operating an LMS of sorts, operating a basic WordPress website, being conversant with Microsoft Office and or Google applications. Again, I would tend to be seeking out my own, your own applications, your own licenses for these things, perhaps above and beyond what may be provided by your institution or organization, because you just really don't know what's going to happen in terms of your careers at this juncture, or perhaps even, if you're just shifting roles within an organization. Higher levels of information and digital literacy are needed, I think, in the particularly in the post-COVID context, where there's a lot more going on in K to 12 and in higher ed, I think, and outside of higher ed too, for that matter. I work in the private sector. All of which is to say that having your own personal education infrastructure, to use a term that we kind of coined on the show, PEI is the acronym, is perhaps a viable way forward, particularly those in the early stages of their career. So that's, I guess, my summarizing commentary at the midpoint, as it were. So now we're going to move on to a more fulsome discussion of productivity apps, specifically the Google applications and as well Microsoft Office 365. So see you presently for that.
Hello, everyone, again. In the supercut, we just saw each other from the middle part of the lecture, the sort of, I guess, midterm summarizing bit. Where I wanted to go now, the last part speaking to tools and applications, is that I do feel it would be beneficial for anybody to know pretty well the ins and outs of at least one type of productivity suite. So when I'm talking about productivity suites, what I'm referring to is these packages of programs that have a word processing program like Microsoft Word, or a presentation software such as Google Slides, or Excel sheets, um, sorry, Google Sheets, Excel, um, I guess it's just Excel workbooks. That's what they're called. Um, I don't use Excel that much, if I'm being honest. So, but these are the kind of applications that are used in the course of everyday kind of work. So, I mean, many of you may already have experience as educators. Many of you have likely worked in other fields and other careers. Um, One thing that I will sort of put out there is that productivity apps themselves, depending on how they're used, can effectively provide most of the features of a learning management system or a content management system. So what I'm going to sort of put out there in terms of like similarities, in terms of what applications or usage it may potentially hold for you. Um, to begin with, I tend to think of productivity suites as being associated with Microsoft Office 365 and or Google Apps. With 365, I'm not going to presume that everybody has had a ton of experience with this, but back not even that long ago, I don't think you have to even necessarily go back before 365 existed. When you wanted to use Microsoft Word, you had to go to the computer store or go online and buy a copy of that software and install it on your computer. Similarly, with PowerPoint or Excel or some of these other applications typically associated with work, um, 365, Office 365, is essentially a cloud-based bundle of these apps. So by cloud-based, I mean it exists entirely on the internet without needing to actually have the software on your machine. And so what that typically will involve is paying for an annual or monthly license for access to this set of applications, which include, in addition to the ones that I've already mentioned, there are some pretty specific apps that you can get, and you can sort of customize through your purchases what your license is going to include. So, for instance, Microsoft Project is used heavily by certain kinds of professionals. Um, I mean, there's just a really a pretty wide range of them, and to that extent, um, I tend to associate those apps, 365, with a workplace environment. So, for instance, when I worked at Thompson Rivers, the organization that I work for now, as well, provides every person who works for the organization an email address and a login ID that's associated with that email address. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Which came first, the user identity or the user email? I guess it's probably the identity. Anyway, so much like a learning management system, LMS, that we talked about earlier, I associate these apps with a firewall, an institutional or organizational sign-in. Now, that does not have to be the case. And what I'm actually, as I recommended with WordPress or your CMS package, as I alluded to with Moodle Cloud or some of the other learning management system services, I feel like you're going to get your best advantage from these productivity suites by actually owning your own license, by spending whatever marginal amount it is per year to have access to those if you feel that you need them. Um, I would say that on the basis of the Google, necessarily something that you have to pay for to get benefit out of, but for the amount that it costs, I found myself that it's worth it to have, because I work on a few different machines for my personal work, apart from even just my subscription through work. So for my creative endeavors, for my own personal purpose, my consulting business, I have a subscription to Office 365, which again, it's based in the cloud, so I can access it from my laptop, my desktop, or my phone as needed, which is convenient. Now, I understand that in the school districts, I understand this because I have children in schools district 73, and every day I get reports about their activities in the Google learning environment. So it definitely is good to know the feature set of a word processing program and how to use it. Again, I think you wouldn't have made it this far into your education if you lacked that knowledge, probably. But it's worth it to emphasize the need to be proficient with word processing and software, and potentially, because if you have to do any amount of calculation, if you're looking at perhaps being the person in your department or office who is in charge of a budget somehow, or if you're running a budget even for a project or a workshop, then Excel can obviously be very helpful. So I differentiate the Microsoft Office 365 offering from the Google set of tools. The Google set of tools, um, you can get just by having a Gmail account. That's kind of the entry point. And with the Gmail account, establishing you in Google's infrastructure, as it were, you then have the ability to access, well, I mean, a whole plethora of apps, but notably documents, notably slides, notably sheets. And what is, I think, pretty cool about the powerful infrastructure that Google is able to command because of its huge search engine business and other apps is that you have the ability to take, for instance, Word documents or documents that might be in another format and upload those into your Google Drive, open them with the Documents program, or the Slides program or the Sheets, and that will then render it in its own proprietary format, in Google's own proprietary format. And then it will let you, when you're finished, and if you wish to, not only can you share those with links, with live links to those documents, or sheets or slides, setting them up with a level of permission that you're comfortable with, you have the ability to export them as a Word document or as some other format, as a PDF, for instance. So it's sort of a good way to move between formats. And I personally have found that the Google Docs as a collaborative tool is probably the lowest barrier in terms of a tech technology knowledge threshold to use a collaborative in a collaborative environment. Now, one of the problems, so-called, associated with the Google suite of tools is that while they are widely used throughout the school districts, they are there are very significant privacy concerns, especially to the extent that British Columbia has, to the best of my knowledge, among the most stringent privacy data privacy laws, data privacy protection laws in Canada. So there were actually issues with using cloud-based services such as Google Docs with students at the higher education level. This is something that needs explicit sign off from individual students. And if you are thinking about doing this whatsoever within the context of higher education, I would recommend strongly checking in with the privacy officer at the university to see about that. But again, I feel like most of the people who are watching this are going to be pre-service teachers or educators who are going to be involved in the school districts. And I believe, as a parent, I'm fairly certain that every year I'm required to sign off giving the school district permission to use Google and other similarly publicly accessible applications. And again, one of the concerns, I guess, with some use of Google applications is that uh, all usage, of course, is monitored. All um, all of the analytics are going directly into Google, and there's not really any transparency in what happens with those analytics besides the obvious product development. So again, there are people with very strong opinions, and rightfully so, potentially, about that topic. So I think just it's important to have a good communication policy in place regarding any learning technology applications that you plan to use, but particularly those which are run by some of these larger tech companies and require setting up user accounts, which require then student names and potentially other information which may contravene people's privacy. And again, giving students the ability to opt out is very important. Again, I keep sort of thinking of this in terms of a higher education or post-secondary frame because that's where I've spent a lot of my career. Um, my, I guess, advice that I would put out there in terms of becoming acquainted with these tools is you should know how to use them. One or both of those sets of tools, Microsoft Office 365 and or Google applications, and just sort of maintaining that knowledge, using them in your own collaborative or work processes, even outside, for instance, having students engage with them, just being fluent with those tools will help ensure that you have kind of a higher level of digital literacy overall, which is something that you'll likely want to be able to model for your students. Students are looking to you for cues in terms of how their own learning should proceed. So, in seeing you as an educator who's working with them demonstrate competence or comfort or enjoyment, it's going to make it maybe seem a little bit easier for them to kind of take on those kinds of engagements and interactions in their own spheres of influence and in their own endeavors. So again, I guess in terms of course delivery, I would just say that it is definitely possible to run an online or distance-based course within the within a learning environment that exists inside of a suite of productivity apps, between Google Documents, between email, just from Outlook or Gmail, between using YouTube and other streaming and video services. All of these applications can be used effectively for a teaching and learning purpose. It really depends whether you're looking at a learning management system offering, or whether you are looking at something that's more akin to a content management system or one of these productivity suites. They all have their place. They all have the capability to help you help your students, help you express yourself as an educator, and help your students express themselves as students. And they have the ability to really elevate a face-to-face learning environment through blended learning practice, or even in the event that you have the opportunity to use some of them for fully distance-based teaching, whether in the short or longer term. It really just sort of comes down to what your purpose is as a teacher, what your comfort levels are. And I think probably that's about all I'd want to say about the productivity apps, and being mindful perhaps of the amount of time that's gone into these videos, these segments. The supercut, if you will, I believe is probably in excess of an hour now. I promised Pam that I would keep it to about an hour. So, Dr. Gurney, I should say. So I guess I would just say thanks very much for your attention. Thanks very much to Pam, to Dr. Gurney for inviting me for these past several lectures in these different courses. I really wanted to take the opportunity to kind of do this lecture, this discussion, focusing mainly on tools and bundles of applications on my own, owing to the fact that I did spend 4 years as a coordinator of learning technologies at Thompson Rivers. So I do like to revisit those areas of my past practice a bit if I can sometimes. But then also, I just really enjoy the opportunity to talk with you, to speak with you, to discuss and engage. So please feel free to put comments in the WordPress post where you're watching this video or listening to this audio. I will let them go for about a week. I will definitely approve them all immediately. And then about a week from now, I'll take any questions that have come up and speak to those in a separate video or blog post. So I guess that's probably it for now. Great to have the opportunity to speak with you today. Appreciate your time very much. Thanks again to Dr. Gurney for the invite to be here. Take care, and bye for now.